Welcome to the Coin Bureau Weekly Crypto Review. Here are this week's top headlines in the crypto news. Criminal crypto crackdowns. Authorities seized nearly $60 million worth of cryptocurrency in two of the largest criminal confiscations to date. What will happen to all these coins and tokens? Bitcoin makes history in Miami. Crypto companies and personalities make game-changing announcements at the world's largest crypto conference, but where is the hype? Enter Elon. After teasing a Twitter alternative, Tesla's eclectic CEO takes a significant stake in one of the largest social media companies. Is this the first of many buys? Zuck Bucks. Meta reportedly plans to introduce its own class of digital currencies to its various platforms. Could this have an impact on the crypto market? Canada's pro-crypto candidate. Pierre Poilievre tells Canadians that BTC is a means to, quote, opt out of inflation, and teases Bitcoin as legal tender if elected. Is this a marketing tactic or something more? Recession questions. Deutsche Bank declares that a US recession is imminent, and most Americans agree. Here are the warning signs that the experts are watching. The Fed's inflation fears. Hawkish comments by Federal Reserve governors leave the markets on edge as March's inflation readings approach. When will we finally see peak inflation? And a closer look at last week's top-performing cryptos and where they're headed next. All this and more in just a moment. Good morning, afternoon, or evening. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Guy, and what you're about to see is educational content, not financial advice. You can find any topics you're looking for using the timestamps in the video timeline. And now for today's top stories. Last week, authorities in Germany and the United States cracked down on two criminal enterprises that were using cryptocurrency as part of their operations. The first was the infamous Hydra darknet marketplace, which accounted for a whopping 80% of the online underworld economy. As part of the crackdown, German authorities confirmed that they had seized at least $25 million in BTC from Hydra's henchmen. It's possible, if not likely, that this figure will increase, as Hydra is believed to have processed over $5 billion in crypto transactions since 2015. Across the pond, US authorities seized at least $34 million of unspecified cryptocurrencies, which were allegedly being used to launder darknet marketplace money. What's crazy is that this crackdown took place in Miami shortly before the beginning of the Bitcoin conference, which I'll get to in just a moment. If you've been keeping up with the crypto headlines lately, you might have noticed that there's been a significant number of criminal crypto seizures since the start of the year. The largest of these was easily the February seizure of over $3.6 billion of BTC from the Bitfinex hack, which I covered at length in a separate video. That's in the description. Now, if you're wondering what's going to happen to all this seized crypto, well, history suggests that most, if not all of it, will eventually be sold at auction to institutional investors. As far as I can tell, it looks like there's been a lot of competition on that front because entities like MicroStrategy and Terra's Luna Foundation Guard have recently been buying BTC by the boatload. This has contributed to the massive decline of BTC held by exchanges, and it's possible that BTC reserves are starting to run low for institutions that are looking to buy over-the-counter from these exchanges. This makes all the recent crypto seizures very convenient for the institutions who have been itching to get into the crypto market at a good price. Institutional is certainly the word that came to mind at this year's Bitcoin conference in Miami, which I was lucky enough to attend. If you're subscribed to Coin Bureau Clips or follow me on social media, you've probably already seen snippets of my rather sweaty adventures there. I'll be giving you a deeper dive into exactly what went down at the conference in a video later this week, so all I'll say for now is that it was somewhat underwhelming. This is because at last year's Bitcoin conference in Miami, Salvadoran President Nayib Bukele announced that the country would be making BTC legal tender as part of a presentation by Zap Incorporated and Strike CEO Jack Mallers. Obviously, this set high expectations for this year's conference, especially since both Najib and Jack predicted and teased that similarly big announcements would be forthcoming. Unfortunately, Najib was unable to attend at the last minute, and Jack's highly anticipated announcement was Strike's integration with the Shopify e-commerce platform for BTC payments on the Lightning Network. As big a milestone as this is for the adoption of Bitcoin, it didn't exactly meet the expectations of the audience, at least from what I could tell. Another similarly significant milestone was the de facto adoption of BTC as legal tender by a special economic zone on the Honduran island of Roatan, as well as the Portuguese island of Madeira. Now, I say de facto because the definition of legal tender seems to have been stretched to make the announcements seem, well, more impressive than they were. A Mexican politician was also part of the presentation by former Blockstream CSO Samson Moe, which showcased the supposed instance of nation-state Bitcoin adoption. The problem there is that Mexico isn't exactly on the cusp of making BTC legal tender, and the idea itself still seems to be on the fringes of the country's political discourse. Make no mistake, however, these announcements and developments are a step in the right direction. They're just smaller steps than most people were expecting. A similar situation seems to be unfolding with Tesla CEO Elon Musk's apparent takeover of Twitter after he purchased a 9.2% stake in the company. If you've been keeping up with my weekly crypto reviews, you'll know Elon had pushed a poll on Twitter in March asking whether the platform adhered to the principles of free speech, to which 70% said no. A few days after Elon announced his epic purchase, Twitter's recently seated CEO Parag Agrawal announced that Elon had been appointed to its board of directors. This means Elon will have a big say in how Twitter is run, and he responded to Parag's tweet with, quote, "Looking forward to working with Parag and Twitter board to make significant improvements to Twitter in coming months." Now, I must say that some of the responses from the crypto community were seriously comical. Many of the memes implied that Twitter as a whole isn't all that happy about Elon's imposing presence, and subsequent reactions from select Twitter employees suggests this is the case. Interestingly, though, Twitter stock saw an impressive pump in response to all this news, suggesting that the average investor is in favor of scaling back some of the censorship creep we've seen on social media over the last few years, which wouldn't be all that surprising. Also, unsurprisingly, Dogecoin saw an impressive pump too, and it's been popping off in response to every tweet from Elon related to his Twitter shenanigans, especially since he's been openly pondering pushing for Doge as a payment option for Twitter's monthly subscription service. Although there's been lots of speculation about whether Elon will try the same tactics with other tech giants such as Facebook, this is objectively unlikely. Note that the viral screenshot you may have seen, which features Elon asking Mark Zuckerberg if he can buy Facebook, was unfortunately confirmed as fake. More importantly, Elon isn't the only shareholder around this part of Twitter town. Massive asset managers like BlackRock and Vanguard also hold significant stakes in the company, and might have even more of a say thanks to their large stakes in affiliated entities. You can learn more about just how much influence these asset managers have over the market by watching my video about ESG using the link in the description. Now, in any case, it looks like Elon might manage to make some significant changes to Twitter, and it's clear that crypto is part of his master plan. Twitter's not the only social media giant that's teetering towards crypto either. According to a recent report by the Financial Times, Meta is, quote, seeking alternative revenue streams and new features that can attract and retain users in response to the rapid decline of its empire of social media platforms. Naturally, the best way to do this is with a digital currency, which Meta is now reportedly planning to introduce to its metaverse. Meta employees are apparently referring to this digital currency as Zuck Bucks in their internal conversations, and it looks like it won't at all resemble Facebook's failed Libra, aka Diem. The biggest difference is that Meta's digital currency won't exist on a blockchain and will instead be more like digital tokens you can buy to use in other online games such as RuneScape. Meta is also planning to introduce centralized NFTs, which may be monetizable in the future. Meta employees told the Financial Times that the company is hyper-focused on finding ways of introducing digital currencies to its ecosystem, which won't result in the same regulatory roadblocks as Facebook's former ventures. The journalist who broke the story points out that this actually wouldn't be the first time Meta had a centralized digital currency. Back in 2009, Facebook introduced Facebook Credits, which could be spent in games like Farmville, the company behind which has now created its own crypto platform called Gala Games. More about Gala Games in the description. I digress. Facebook credits were surprisingly lucrative, accounting for no less than 16% of the company's revenues in 2012. Now, Facebook credits were scrapped in 2013 because they were, quote, too costly to maintain. But something tells me that Meta has more than enough money to make this ancient system efficient. What's funny is that Facebook credits could very well end up becoming a better store of value than fiat currency, and if they become available on all of Meta's platforms, it could potentially create a whole new economy. Creating a whole new economy is ultimately what cryptocurrency is all about, and the idea has become so appealing that it's now being parroted by one of Canada's top politicians as part of his bid to become the country's next Prime Minister. Pierre Poilievre is a member of Canada's Conservative Party, which is analogous to the Republican Party in the United States, but much more vanilla, so perhaps more comparable with the UK Conservative Party. Pierre happens to be the most popular politician in Canada as far as social media metrics go. This is primarily because of his historical role as Shadow Finance Minister, which is a pretty cool name for the person tasked with critiquing the actual finance minister from the other side of the aisle. If you're a fan of finance, chances are you've seen the viral videos of Pierre blasting officials from Canada's ruling party for causing the record-setting inflation the country has seen over the last 2 years, particularly in the housing sector, where costs have more than doubled. As you might have guessed, Canada's current finance minister seems to have been the mastermind behind the Canadian government's unprecedented decision to freeze the bank accounts of people protesting pandemic restrictions in the country earlier this year. This has subsequently made Pierre's talking points more popular than ever, and it's also a part of why he's embraced Bitcoin as part of his own political platform. Not only is BTC a store of value, but BTC transactions and balances are immune to this kind of centralized control. Pierre first made the crypto headlines at the end of March when he visited a Canadian restaurant called Tahini's that also made the crypto headlines in 2020 after going all in on BTC to protect the company's purchasing power at the start of the pandemic. Pierre paid for his meal in BTC using Lightning and said, quote, "People should have the freedom to choose other money. If the government is going to abuse our cash, we should have the freedom to use other, higher quality cash. That includes freedom to own and use crypto, tokens, smart contracts, and decentralized finance." Pierre recently made the crypto headlines again for doubling down on his crypto push, including a campaign promise to, quote, "let people take back control of their money from bankers and politicians," an admittedly overused populist talking point. For what it's worth, Pierre seems to be walking the walk in this regard. He recently spoke for half an hour about crypto, fiat, and inflation with the owner of Tahini's restaurant while smoking shisha. I'll leave a link to the video in the description if you're interested, and I'll say it's worth a watch. The only thing missing from that conversation was a discussion about what could happen to BTC if the world enters a recession, and the risk of a recession is starting to become very real. While recession has been a hot topic since the pandemic began, it wasn't until early last week that the first institution officially sounded the alarm. This institution was Deutsche Bank, which now projects the US economy will enter a recession sometime next year, and this means a recession is on the cards for every other country too. Late last week, a chief investment strategist at the Bank of America jumped on the bandwagon and warned the bank's clients to brace for a, quote, recession shock. These institutional warnings are consistent with the sentiment among regular retail, with over 80% of Americans expecting the recession to begin later this year. To put things into perspective, there hasn't been a recession since 2008, and this has many investors and consumers nervous, since there's an expectation that it's going to be much worse this time around. Besides stuff like consumer sentiment, recession indicators the experts are watching include the yield curve, which is the difference in interest rates between short-term and long-term government bonds. Under normal economic conditions, longer-term government bonds pay higher interest rates because of the opportunity cost that comes with lending out that money for a longer time. When things in the economy get wonky, however, short-term government bonds will pay a higher interest rate than longer-term government bonds, and this causes the interest rate curve, aka yield curve, to invert. Put simply, a yield curve inversion is seen as a sign that something's not quite right with the economy, and that usually means a recession is imminent, but not always. Another recession indicator that the experts have been watching lately is called peak inflation, which is basically a fancy term for when the rate of inflation starts to slow down. In case you somehow haven't noticed, the rate of inflation has only been accelerating over the last year, and many people expect to see more record inflation when the CPI statistics for March come out this Tuesday. This is because of Russia's invasion of Ukraine at the end of February, which really only started spooking the economy in March. It looks like the Federal Reserve got spooked too, because minutes from its March meeting show that it's ready to start reducing its balance sheet as early as next month to keep inflation under control. I'll be doing a video about that later this week too, so I won't get into the details here. All you need to know right now is that reducing the Fed's balance sheet means that interest rates will rise even more aggressively. I imagine investors around the world are praying to every god they can think of that the inflation statistic for March magically shows a reduction in the rate of inflation. In crypto speak, they're desperate for the top of the inflation trend. The bad news is that it doesn't look like that top will come in any time soon, and that means the markets will be responding with a lot of volatility whenever a Fed board member so much as sneezes. The good news is we're entering a period that crypto was designed for, specifically BTC. Bitcoin was created in response to the last financial crisis, and it looks like it's slowly becoming a lifeboat for all the people around the world who are starting to drown in the fluid of the current financial system. Believe it or not, but it's possible that central banks will start jumping into the Bitcoin boat too, and you can find out why that is by using the link in the description. Turning to the charts, we can see that BTC took a beating last week. This is fundamentally because of the Fed's hawkish rhetoric that I just mentioned. Now, we seem to have found some support on the 50-day moving average at around 42.5k, and I have doubts that we'll be moving much lower than that, given how oversold the RSI is looking. I suspect this will all depend on the inflation figures for March, which will come out this Tuesday. Not to place any big speculative bets here, because the crypto market sometimes has a habit of responding in the opposite way that you'd expect. The only thing you can expect for sure is volatility. That I can almost guarantee. As far as altcoins go, this week's winners are Mina Protocol, Monero, Dogecoin, Neutrino USD, and the USDP stablecoin. Let me just say that you know the crypto markets are down when stablecoins are some of the week's biggest gainers. Starting with Mina Protocol, the Mina coin is pumping because of a recent Coinbase listing. And if you watched my video about the Coinbase effect, you'll know this means more gains could be on the horizon in the long term. Don't get your hopes up in the short to medium term, though. Mina has hit a huge wall of resistance around the $3.50 mark, and there's even more resistance at the $4.50 mark. Next, we have Monero, and XMR appears to be pumping because of a combination of meeting exciting development milestones and the Monero meetup over the weekend dubbed Monerotopia. As you can see, XMR is still 50% down from its all-time high, but it is still in a strong long-term uptrend. I will caution that this uptrend could be broken if major exchanges start to delist XMR because it's a privacy coin, but I personally don't see that happening anytime soon. Then there's Dogecoin, whose pump has already been discussed. It's all about the Musk, and that means the current pump will only last as long as the Doge father keeps smashing that keyboard before he moves on to something else. That said, Dogecoin is seeing some serious development behind the scenes, and you can track that progress by checking out the Dogecoin GitHub. When it comes to Neutrino USD, it's a bit complicated because even though it is a stablecoin, it hasn't really been all that stable as of late. That's because it's collateralized by waves, which saw some strange price activity over the last couple of weeks, to put it mildly. These issues seem to have been resolved, but it's still worth exercising caution. The same goes for Paxos's USDP, because even though it's arguably the most trustworthy stablecoin out there, it's still centralized. That means Paxos can freeze your USDP holdings, and history suggests it will not hesitate to do so if asked by authorities. I much prefer Terra's UST, and you can find out why it's the best decentralized stablecoin out there by using the link in the description. And that is all for today's Coin Bureau Weekly Crypto Review. If you enjoyed it, folks, you know what to do. Hit that like button, subscribe button, and bell icon too. With summer weather on the way, it's high time to get your hands on crypto apparel that will put the no-coiners to shame. You can do exactly that while supporting the channel by shopping at the Coin Bureau merch store by using the link down that way. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in next week's episode.